Right, it's 9:30 and I think we've now got everyone on the call that we're expecting. If there's any questions as we go along, please feel free to pop them into the Q&A box, which should be on your screen. I'm gonna deal with questions at the end, and I've already had a couple in advance, so I'll touch on those at the end. Just to give you a quick summary, hopefully you can all see my my presentation, which I'm going to run through today. My name is Harry Lloyd Davis. I'm one of the partners here at Bevan & Buckland, and the reason for putting today's webinar on is really to try and make sure that all of our customers and all the businesses who are watching are aware of what support is currently available here in South Wales at the moment. I'm going to flick on to the next slide. As I said in the email that went out last night, this is going to be a relatively short webinar. I'm only hoping to get it across it all in 50 minutes. I'm not going to go into any of the detail, but if you do have any questions on the detail, please feel free to drop them into the question box or email me afterwards and I will come back to you. But to be honest, I think to go through everything that has now been announced in detail will probably take a good couple of hours, if not probably half a day. So today's webinar is really just to try and highlight the key areas of support to make sure there's nothing you've missed out on. And we are certainly, you know, I am coming across businesses that have missed out on things they're eligible for, which is why I wanted to put this webinar on, just to try and give people an idea what is available that you may have missed. Or to be honest, a lot of the times it's things which was announced relatively early in the crisis, which still hasn't come online yet, to just make sure you haven't forgotten about them. So I'm going to kick off with the coronavirus job retention scheme. Hopefully everyone is aware of this because it's probably been one of the most highly publicised of all the various supports that was put out there, and probably the one with the most questions and the one that's caused the most headaches. This is whereby if you furlough your staff, you can get 80% of their wages back. And that scheme has been running now, you know, it went live effectively backdated to the 1st of March, but the portal where you could actually start claiming your money went live in April. So we started seeing claims going in last Monday, and the cash on the ones that went in last Monday came through this Monday. So it seems to be working well and fairly effectively. The things to probably watch out with on this one in particular are that the revenue, although the portal to make the claim was there on Monday morning, the calculator to help you work out what you're actually entitled to wasn't really working effectively until Friday. And there are still, I believe, some issues and glitches and questions are a little bit unknown. So, you know, what we don't know yet is what the revenue are going to do when it comes to investigating these claims and how much time they're going to have, you know, how much sympathy are they going to have for errors that have been made. It's probably also sort of worth having a think about when you're next going to put your claim in. Because obviously we expect, or there's a good chance that lockdown will come to an end at some point in May. And so whereas an awful lot of people put their claims in the middle of April for the whole of April because they knew furlough was going to continue, you may not be in that position in May. So you may need to do a bit more planning on your cash flow if you're going to have to wait until after the month end before you put your claim in to know exactly where you are on the furlough end. So as I say, really it's been, I think, a fairly major success, this scheme. The money seems to be getting out to businesses. There are a lot of questions and there's still a lot of questions we just don't have the answers to on them. But on the whole, if you haven't already put your claim in, it's probably now it's time to start certainly putting your claim in for March and April within the next week, and then have a think about when you're going to put your May claim in as well. But that certainly is a scheme that's live, it's open and working reasonably well. So if you've got staff on furlough, make sure you remember to claim the money back. And I'm going to flick on to the Welsh Government Business Grants. I wanted to touch on this fairly early on because it's one of the ones which has caused a couple of issues. Again, this was a very early bit of support. Welsh Government gave £25,000 to any business with a rateable value between 12 and 51,000 in retail, leisure and hospitality, and £10,000 grant to any business, small business with a rateable value of under £12,000. So a £10,000 grant no matter what sector you were in. And again, this I think has been one of the big successes. That money got out to businesses very quickly. It came via the local authorities, and the vast majority of our customers who are eligible have had that money now, which is good news and been a huge boost to those businesses. But the reason I wanted to mention it earlier is I've spoken to at least 3 businesses in the last week who've not had the money and were eligible. So if you're not sure, I would certainly now speak to your local authority and get them to double check whether you should have had the money. Because in some instances, if databases have been incorrect, it seems, or some local authorities have automatically contacted the customers, others have been a bit slower. It's only been where the business has contacted the local authority, the money's come through. So if you haven't already had that money and you think you're eligible, I would certainly make sure you get onto that, because the mad rush at the beginning is gone. They should have staff now who can help you to get hold of that money. Another question we've been asked a lot on this is the tax status of that grant. So I just thought I'd touch on it. The principle is this grant is to cover costs as a result of the virus. So it should be money in to cover costs that you spent, and therefore there's no real tax impact. But in reality, if you've had this grant despite you've had no impact on your business, your profits are therefore going to be 10,000 and higher, and you will have to pay tax on it, I'm afraid. So just something to bear in mind that, although it's 10,000 of free money, so to speak, you will end up having to pay tax on it if you haven't got any costs to put against it. I then wanted to touch on the Development Bank of Wales loan scheme, because again, this was fairly early on. Welsh Government on the 30th of March, they launched it. They started getting the loans approved and funds released within a week, which was very, very good. But the £100 million that they put into this scheme didn't go very far, and it got shut and oversubscribed within a week after 1,500 applications. So unfortunately, if you wanted a loan, this one is no longer available. But the reason I wanted to mention it is that I have heard that potentially if you were already a Development Bank of Wales customer, they may well still be able to help you. So whilst it's shut at the moment, what we don't know is if some of those loans that have been applied for get rejected, or the business has changed their mind and don't want the money, whether that will reopen. So it's one that's shut at the moment, but we will let you know if it comes back online. If you do need to borrow money, though, the UK government major scheme was called the Coronavirus Business Interruption Loan Scheme, or CBILS. This still is very much up and running. It didn't have a great start. It was launched fairly early, but came in for some fairly heavy criticism, particularly from small businesses where they were being rejected, and there were lots of sort of extra questions and government and personal guarantees being asked for. There have been changes to the scheme, and it seems to be working a lot more effectively now. And we've seen a number of our customers get hold of this cash in the last couple of weeks. It's an interest-free loan, or should be, for the first year. The government is providing an 80% guarantee, so the bank is only risking 20%, which should mean that they are more willing to lend this money. And we are seeing these loans come through. So if you haven't applied for it as yet, and I know a lot of businesses chose not to because they didn't really need it, and quite rightly in my view, they wanted the businesses who were desperate for the cash to get access to it first. So if you haven't applied for it yet, I strongly recommend you speak to your bank in the first instance to see if you're eligible and to try and get it if you need it. If you're finding it difficult with your bank, and some of the banks have been sort of overrun with this a little bit, it's worth going on to the link up on the slide there, the britishbusinessbank.co.uk website, because there are over 40 different providers now who are accredited to under this scheme to lend money. And some of them are the smaller challenger banks who might have a bit more appetite to lend, and slightly more efficient processes to get the loan applications through. And there are also people on there like UK Steel Enterprise, who, particularly in areas like Neath Talbot, Llanelli, and possibly even Swansea, are able to do work. So you might find someone like that is a more sympathetic ear than the traditional banks. So something which is still very much alive and going fairly well now, the business interruption loan schemes, is certainly one to look at if you want to borrow money to come through this. We then moved back to the Welsh Government and their Economic Resilience Fund, which they launched I think just over a week ago now, but unfortunately, again, this has been something where it's always been a victim of its own success. They've had 9,000 requests for support, and the scheme was paused this Monday, so on the 27th. Welsh Government actually started by putting £200 million into this fund and have increased it to £300 million, and it's all gone. And I think their initial press release said it would remain open all year, which I did think was optimistic, and sure enough, within a couple of weeks, the whole amount has been allocated. I've had a lot of clients contact me in the last week who applied for this fund who said, well, I haven't heard anything. I saw a press release on Monday that said that they're processing 700 claims a day. So it doesn't surprise me that many people haven't heard, because that suggests it's going to be at least a couple of weeks before they get through to processing all the claims. And the people who have heard seem to have been the smaller micro-sized grants. It's the people going for the £10,000 grant rather than the larger amount. So I do wonder whether they're tackling the simpler ones first and then will then move on to the larger claims. But as I say, if you have applied and you haven't heard anything, I wouldn't worry too much. I think you're probably in the majority at the moment. But if you haven't applied, unfortunately, that one is now closed. But again, it may reopen depending on how many of those claims get rejected and whether the Welsh Government chooses to put more money into the pot. And I want to move back to a couple, and this was one of the ones that was announced very early, but you can't claim it as yet, but it's an important one, so don't forget about it, and that's the ability to claim back statutory sick pay paid to employees during the crisis. So very early on, when the government was encouraging people with symptoms to go home and self-isolate, they announced that they would allow businesses to reclaim the statutory sick pay, but that is not yet available. So it's one, if you have paid any sick pay out to staff, bear that in mind. You will be able to get that money back, but leave it on the to-do list for now, because the portal to claim it back, I checked this morning, it's still not there, but we don't exactly know when it will come live. Similarly, another one which is coming but isn't there yet is the ability to claim a grant through the Coronavirus Self-Employment Income Support Scheme. This is the one that is targeted at self-employed individuals. There are criteria for it, so you can't have been earning more than £50,000 a year in profits, and you can't have more than half your income, and your self-employed income has to be more than half of your income. But if you do meet those criteria, you should, and you've been badly affected by the coronavirus, you should then be able to claim some grant support. We are told that the middle of May, so the middle of next month, HMRC will contact the people they believe to be eligible to let them know that they can apply, and then there will be a requirement to put a claim in via the government, the gov.uk website. So as I say, if my recommendation would be not to worry about this too much for now, but if by the end of May you have not heard anything and you think potentially you should have had something, let us know and we can tell you whether we think you're eligible. And we're also setting up a system at the moment to be able to process those claims for our clients. A couple of others now, which are a cash flow based, really, rather than sort of extra money and things which are going to help you with the costs, but welcome nonetheless. And the first is a deferral of VAT payments. Again, this was announced very early, but it means that any payments due between March the 20th to the end of June will not have to be paid on the due date, and you can actually pay those payments now at the end of March 2021. So in effect, it's the quarter's ended. The VAT returns for the quarter ended March, April, and May. You will not have to pay your VAT. The key point here is to remember that you've still got to do your return, and they will take the money unless you cancel a direct debit. So make sure you've cancelled your direct debit, and otherwise they will take the money. And this is only a deferral. They're not cancelling the liability. You will still have to pay this VAT, but not until next year. Similarly then, they've also announced something very similar for self-assessment. So the July self-assessment tax bill, you will not have to pay that in July. Normally you have to make your second payment on account in July, and then you make your final balancing payment in the following January. So you haven't got to make a payment on account in July if you're self-employed, or if you're a director who receives dividends and has personal tax bills for that reason. You're not going to have to make your second payment on account until January 2021. But again, it's not a cancellation of the debt. It's just a fact that you will have to defer it. So you'll have to pay it in January 2021. And another thing we've got a lot of questions on is other taxes. So lots of people struggling to pay corporation tax bills or PAYE bills. There's no official deferral on these things, but I'd strongly recommend you speak to the HMRC about time to pay. So we've got we've seen a lot of evidence in the last few weeks where the revenue have been far more sympathetic. The grilling that they were giving you is nowhere near as difficult. And if you're genuinely struggling, if you speak to them and ask for time to pay, we definitely recommend doing it before the tax bill is due, but you will find them far more sympathetic than they have been. So it's definitely worth asking the question if you are struggling to pay any other bills on top of VAT and the self-assessment. A couple of other ones then, just to finish off. So the business rates relief in Wales. So again, this applies to retail, leisure and hospitality sector, but none of those businesses have to pay any business rates for the whole of 2020, 2021, so the tax year. So, this is a really nice relief because it's not just a cash flow boost, it's also a boost to your profit and loss if you were paying rates previously. And this should be happening automatically. So you shouldn't be paying any rates now from April onwards. It's not one you have to apply for. You just shouldn't be getting the bills as we understand it, or those bills should be reduced to zero. But if you are still getting a bill and you think you shouldn't be, again, speak to the local authority to get that sorted out. And the last bit of sort of support is this week's new announcement, which is bounce back loans. They've come up, slightly more snappy title. I think, you know, the acronyms for all the other support were beginning to drive us all a bit insane. So bounce back loans sounds a lot more snappy. And these are loans that are aimed at small businesses. So the loans are going to be between £2,000 and £50,000. They're claiming the cash will be accessed within days, and it'll be a very straightforward, simple application form. Now, you know, I've read a little bit in the press this morning. The banks have been a little bit nervous about these loans already. So whether it will launch on Monday, who knows? But the principle is they're 100% government backed. So that doesn't mean that effectively you can take them and just forget about them because the government's going to pay them off. But what it does mean is if you borrow this money and the business fails, the banks then will try and get what they can from the business by collecting your debts or selling your assets, whatever was left in the company when it failed. But then any money the bank can't recover from the business, they will be able to get that money from the government. So effectively, there's no risk to the bank, so they should be willing to get these loans out very quickly and easily. Well, that's certainly the intention. So I'd certainly recommend, if you're a micro business, if you're one of the smaller businesses that hasn't applied for CBILS, if you've applied for CBILS, you can't get this, but you can get it converted. It's certainly worth looking at. And again, it's similar principle, interest-free for the first year with no repayments. So it would be a very useful cash boost to help you get your business back on its feet if needed. One of the little thing I caught in the small print is there is some EU state aid rules surrounding these bounce back loans. So if you're classed as a business in difficulty, which essentially means that you've been loss making, your balance sheet or the accumulated profits are negative, or certainly out of proportion with your share capital, then you may not qualify. So if you're in that, if you're nervous that you've got a weak balance sheet, speak to us or your lender, and we can see if there's anything that we can see that can be done to fix that if you want to get one of these loans. But as I say, keep an eye out for these. They'll be there next week, hopefully. And finally, just a quick message. So the government has set up something to help you access your support. So that link, if you go to it, you can answer you can go through and answer a list of answer a few questions. It's only about 5 or 10, and then it will guide you to the support that's potentially available to your loan. So if you're not sure which of the ones I've just discussed are relevant to you, if you go to that link, it will help you understand what's there. And just finally, again, sorry, I've said finally about 4 times now, but I've just quickly put this slide together this morning, with a sort of a traffic light system. The 2 red ones are the ones that are now closed, you no longer apply for. The green ones, which I've just spoken about, are the ones that are currently live. So they're the ones you should be looking at if you haven't already done so, to take advantage of today. And the orange ones then are the ones where the support is coming, but it's not available yet. So you need to keep it on your to-do list to look at in the days and weeks to come. And I'll email this slide pack out, so you've got that slide on you, and it's also got the links where to find out more information about the ones that are open or becoming open as well. So that's it. As I said, I think I'm a little bit more than 15 minutes, but I think hopefully I've covered off the key support which is available to businesses at the moment. I'm now going to run through a few questions that have come in advance, and something about the one that's come in during the seminar. But if you haven't got any questions, thank you very much for listening, and I'll stop now. But if you want to stay to listen to the questions, you're more than welcome to do so. So I'm going to kick off, as I say, with a couple of questions surrounding furloughing which have come in. In particular now, a number of businesses I'm aware are starting to look at what the bringing staff back off furlough for various reasons. A number of businesses I know who've, their competitors have stayed open, so they're worried they're going to lose business in the long run if they don't do something. The key rule, I think, is that you've got to leave staff on furlough for 3 weeks. So the question that was asked was, if someone's been on furlough, can they come back and do a bit of work and then go back on furlough? As I understand it, the answer is yes. But what you can't do is, if you've got 3 members of staff and you want to rotate them a week each, that, to my mind, doesn't work. They need to be off in 3 weeks, solid blocks on furlough. You can't have people coming in for a week and then going back for being off for 2 weeks and claiming furlough and then coming back in for a week. So just be careful that people are always off for a full 3 weeks if you want to claim the furlough. And we've also had a lot of questions around the date you can start furloughing from, because the Chancellor announced initially that the furlough scheme was going to be open from the 1st of March. And there was a common misunderstanding, which meant that a lot of businesses thought they could claim everything back from day one. from the 1st of March, even though staff were working up until the lockdown started? And the answer is you can't. You can only claim it from the date the lockdown started. But if you've got someone who's done absolutely no work since the 1st of March, I think you can then claim from the 1st of March. So certainly we've had some companies where their staff are off on unpaid leave, or people on zero-hour contracts who had no work at all during March. So they have claimed for the whole month. But one of the questions that was certainly asked to me today was about a member of staff who'd been sent home because they had childminding duties when schools shut, etc. So I think if that member of staff, let's say, worked up to the 10th of March and then went home, I think you could go back to claim from the 10th to the 11th of March, but you couldn't go back and claim for the whole month. So I'm just going to answer then a couple of questions that have come in on the whilst we've been talking. So one is about the bounce back loans. So the maximum is 50,000 or 25% of turnover. That is right. And I think the truth is that I've seen differing reports. I've certainly sort of reported, which is a question, is it for businesses that are under 200,000? And that is what I originally saw. Then I've seen other definitions which say that all micro companies will apply. And micro companies, I can't remember off the top of my head what their turnover goes up to, but it's certainly above 200,000. So I think that's one of the ones where we need to find out the final detail. There's been very little published about these bounce back loans so far. So I think we'll hopefully know more either by Friday or by Monday when they go live. And then we've got another question from Alistair, which is there an indication of what documentation or financials will need to be prepared for Monday? Again, the answer is no. All we've been promised is a very simple online form, but that could mean many different things. I do suspect, though, to do the business in undertaking calculation, you effectively need to look at whether the accumulated losses are more than 50% of the share capital off the top of my head. So I'm pretty certain there will need to be some sort of balance sheet provided so they can do that financial undertaking and difficulty calculation. So I would certainly have a good look at that. And we then got a question from Martin, which is, what is the help that's available for charities? So I'll probably just flick back a slide. And if I just run through the ones which I know some charities are applying for. So you can, if you're a charity, apply for the Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme. And I'll come on to some of the other specific charity stuff I haven't covered today. But you can claim for that, but just be careful if you are publicly funded. Because you potentially then could be ineligible. But I know a number of charities that have furloughed staff and are claiming through that. Some of our charities have certainly as well had the small business grants, the 10,000 and the 25,000, where they've got things like charity shops. In terms of borrowing money through the loan interruption scheme, I'm not aware of any of our charity clients have applied for that yet. But in principle, I don't see there's any reason why you couldn't certainly apply and see if you're eligible. You'll certainly be able to get the statutory sick pay. You won't be eligible for coronavirus self-employment support, in my view. But you like any other business probably can get time to pay on your taxes should it be needed. What I've noticed with charities is that if you go on to the, we've got a special page on our website which gives a bit more details on what support is available for charities. And there is also a fund checker on the Welsh Government website or the Business Wales website, which does help charities understand what extra support is available for them. Because Welsh Government has been putting extra money into the charitable sector. So if you look at some of the big, the major charities and that administer funds across Wales, people like WCVA, you may well find that there's extra pots on their websites as well. On there, I've not really covered the charities in this webinar. This has been focused more at the businesses, but as I say, there is support out there for charities. And if you look on our website, we've got a special charity section which will highlight it for you. I think that's all the questions that I've been asked. So thank you all very much for listening. I hope it's been useful. As I say, we will be sending out copies of the slides and putting a recording on the website as well. If there's anything you want to go back to check. But really, if there's any other questions you've got, please feel free to email me. My email address was on the invite email that went out last night. And I will do my best to answer where we have that information. So thank you all very much for listening. Stay safe, and I hope to speak to you all soon.